I think we've all heard the phrase, gear matters, or even gear doesn't matter. And this video isn't about why gear matters. I think that's been debunked, and the fact that gear does matter to almost all of us is a pretty much accepted fact at this point. This video is about what gear matters in what situations. Because I think as a young cinematographer, DP, or videographer, it can be very confusing to pick out the right gear, especially when everything is absolutely so expensive and there's so many options and so many YouTube reviews talking about a bunch of different kinds of gear. This video is to help you, a young cinematographer, figure out what gear is best for your situation and the kind of work that you typically do. The first thing I really want to talk about is the size of gear and traveling. I think one of the most important things about choosing the gear that you choose is the size. And I'll get into budget later and why you'd want to choose something cheaper over more expensive. But in the land of practicality, moving things around can be tricky. If you have to fly or you're driving with a lot of people, sometimes having a lot of gear isn't an option. And what do you do? If you are shooting commercials, TV, or film, shooting on cinema lenses is a non-option. However, shooting Super 35 with smaller cinema lenses or even budget cinema lenses that tend to be really small, such as the Sirui Nightwalkers, are a huge benefit. You could fit 3 of those lenses in the same space. You could put a 70 to 200. So if you have to work on those kinds of projects, that's an option. However, for people who shoot sports, documentary, or weddings, shooting on a 24 to 70 or 70 to 200 is definitely a better option. You need to have those focal length ranges, and if you only have a certain amount of things you can carry, for example, if you're shooting a wedding or a documentary and all you have is a backpack on you, then having 2 lenses to change out all the time is super useful, especially if you need to capture the moment really quickly. Now, of course, when talking about size, we have to talk about rigging, when to rig and when not to rig. That is the question. Now, I think there's a lot of people out there who just rig out their cameras as much as they can all the time. I would probably throw myself into that group. I certainly love to, but there are times when you definitely don't want to. For example, if you are out in the streets of a large city and you are shooting a documentary, shooting on a large rig with no crew can be very, very dangerous. Robbers are gonna look for your camera and your gear and go, wow, that's expensive, I want that. I'm just gonna take it from them. And they can, and they will, and you won't see it coming. So sizing down your rig in public and on public transit is definitely a good idea if you wanna stay safe, be careful, and also capture what you need to capture. However, expanding your rig is a whole other deal. When shooting on big sets, having a large rig is almost a no-brainer. There are some times where you don't wanna do that, cite the creator, but there are other times where you definitely want to have that rig built out as much as humanly possible because of conveniences like time code, wireless transfer, and easily swappable camera mounts. For example, I rig out my camera a whole lot, and I have turned it into this hot swappable machine where I can take it between a tripod, gimbal, handheld units such as Easy Rig. I can throw it on a Steadicam, go from any one of these apparatuses in just about 30 seconds. I can even throw it on a dolly that's been previously set up with a tripod head or gimbal on it within about 30 seconds or less if it's pre-balanced, which I do quite often. So, rigging out your rig is incredibly important, but there are circumstances like weddings, sports, and documentary where you do not have to rig out your camera to the maximum to achieve the same result. It's not always needed, and if you don't have to spend the money, my suggestion is don't. Now, of course, sometimes you're really far away from your goals because you're constrained by budget. But let's talk about how to close that gap. Of course, getting gear is not as simple as just going out and purchasing it. Usually you have to build things bit by bit. It's very expensive and not easy to do all at once. I know it sure wasn't for me. However, if you're looking to get new gear, you can always rent it for a few days online or at an actual rental house. Test it out and see if you like it or you don't like it. You can rent these to be used on paid projects or personal projects if you don't mind just taking the money out of your own pocket. Renting, in my opinion, is a great way to figure out what actually works for you so you don't accidentally buy something and end up with buyer's remorse. But aside from the actual purchasing of gear itself, sometimes you don't need all that gear. If you're working on a large set where you actually have budget, think about what you want to use that budget for and how much crew you have. You do not want to have too much crew and not enough gear, and vice versa. You don't want to have too much gear and not enough crew, because you don't want to be paying extra people to be there just for them not to do anything. And you certainly don't want to pay to rent out or purchase gear just to not have people to operate it. There's a fine line to figure out how much of each you need, but once you figure that out, you can end up saving a lot of money on your next project. Now, gear is obviously there to serve the story, and that's it. Now, you can't serve the story if you can't capture the story, so it's worth considering the amount of time you have to shoot your story. If you don't have a lot of time, obviously zoom lenses could be a better choice. You could get more out of those lenses than you could a prime. Same deal with a smaller camera and a lighter rig. Like I said earlier, it kind of ties into the size and travel thing a little bit, but it's also a total thing on its own. You could be shooting in your own backyard, but if you don't have a lot of time to shoot, what use is building up an expensive and large rig with a bunch of different lenses to get a bunch of different shots if you could just use a small rig and a zoom lens to accomplish it in half the time? And this goes double for when you're on set. When you're on set, things are expensive. It's expensive to keep people on set and pay them. So if you're gonna do that, you wanna be using your time as efficiently as humanly possible. Now, the last thing I wanna talk about is time. Time is the absolute most important thing when it comes to shooting a project. Gear is there to serve the story, but the story can't be captured if you don't have the time to capture it, which means you should probably choose your gear based off how much time you have. If you have a lot of time and a lot of crew to work with that time, shooting with a larger rig will probably go to your benefit because you'll be able to be more efficient with the shots you get. But at the same time, you'll be able to set up, practice, and rehearse those shots and get them off better, so you have to do less takes in order to get those shots. However, when it comes to more reactive styles of shooting, such as sports, wedding, and documentary, obviously a smaller rig will work for you better, because if you can get in tighter, smaller places and you have a zoom lens, you can get a ton of different shots within the same amount of time that it would take you to just set up for a shot with a larger rig. I have been on tons of sets, including one in particular. The film was called Milagro, directed by Graham Holiday, where we shot I think the first cut ended up being like 16 minutes. He whittled it down from there to like 12, I believe. I'll throw up the actual time code on the screen just so I'm not blabbering wrong time codes. However, we shot a 12-minute short film in about 2.5 days, and that wasn't really necessary. We were taking breaks and kind of going longer than we should, but we were working with actor Cullen Moss, who I've referenced on this channel before. Again, amazing actor, great guy to work with, but we're using professional actors. This isn't a backyard short film. This is high quality, high budget production with special effects and really expensive gear and a lot of crew. I think one day we had like 30 some people on set shooting this basement for a short film. That's crazy. It's a lot. That's as much crew as you could find on even some feature films that maybe just don't have a whole lot going on or a whole lot of budget. But that's absolutely insane for a short film, and it sped up the process a whole lot because people were willing to pitch in their time in order to serve the story, and the gear we chose helped serve that story. We made sure to pre-balance the gimbals, the Steadicam, get the dolly set up in other rooms so that way we could go. We had a whole lot of gear, but we moved faster because of the gear that we had and the time we took in pre-production in order to get that gear set up and move fast. Sometimes on projects, solo shooting can take longer than using a crew, and vice versa. It really comes down to what you need, and what gear you purchase really factors into that. Because most of us are solo filmmakers and aren't going to a rental house for every project we do, picking the right gear bit by bit really does matter. Choosing zoom lenses before prime lenses are probably going to be your best bet. And if you're really into cinematography and shooting commercials, then eventually staying away from zoom lenses and sticking to cinema primes, probably on the budget spectrum, will also probably be your best bet. Super 35 is cheaper, and it's smaller, and it's lighter. That might be something to consider for you. And if you have a lot of money, then by all means, go out and get the gear that you need, but make sure you're using the gear in the right way. Until next time.